One question all Chicago Bulls fans seem to have that really never gets answered is how many titles would the Chicago Bulls have won if Michael Jordan never retired the first time and if Jerry Krause hadn't supposedly broke up the team after the second three-peat. So I am here to answer that very question. What is going on, y'all? Fox Sports Talk. Back at it with another video talking, of course, some NFL here to talk about the Bulls. So if you're a Bulls fan, make sure you go ahead and subscribe. Trying to bring best Bulls content out there. Make sure you are locked into the channel and following me everywhere on all platforms. So with that being said, let's talk about this right now. So I'm obviously bringing this up right now because we are all watching the Last Dance documentary and we're all just curious, obviously, about the entire state of the Bulls dynasty, you know, how it ended and why it ended. And I just want to know everything. You know, I'm just a sports nut and I want to know everything about, you know, the entire Bulls dynasty, which was obviously, in my opinion, the greatest dynasty in the NBA, in NBA history. But when we take a look at the question at hand here about how many titles the Bulls would have won, anybody that says anything, whether or not that's saying the Bulls would have won 8 straight if Jordan never retired or the Bulls would have lost, still both of them or one of them to the Rockets had he not retired, for the most part, it's speculation, right? You're making your best guess. But if there is one person who I believe was or is the most plugged in person out of anybody into that Bulls dynasty is Sam Smith. If you guys don't know Sam Smith is a sports writer, journalist who has been covering the Chicago Bulls since, I believe, 1983. Michael Jordan got drafted in 1984. That is how long this man has been covering. I believe he covered it for the Chicago Tribune. He's with Bulls.com right now. But for the most part, you guys might know him because he wrote the famous book, The Jordan Rules. He's also written other books, but that was his most famous book. And the reason I bring up Sam Smith is because he did a podcast the other day, and I listened to the entire podcast. It was with Howard Beck, who's another NBA writer, a great writer. And they kind of did a deep dive into that entire crux of the question that I asked here. And they were talking about, obviously, The Last Dance, and Howard kept asking Sam all of these questions. And Sam Smith gave some answers I had never heard of in my life as a Bulls fan. And I've been, you know, obviously watching and researching about the team in forever. And so what Sam Smith said, I want to share with you guys because I feel like he is the best source on this. You know, everything I say is still speculation too. But like I said, Sam Smith, this man was around Michael Jordan. He was around the Bulls. He covered it all. He wrote books on it, okay? I'm not saying he can't be wrong, but I am saying he had the most insight you could have. So Howard asked him the question, right? You know, first question being is if Jordan never retires, do they beat the Houston Rockets? And here's the thing. Sam Smith basically said that the Bulls really struggled with the Rockets. They really struggled with the Rockets in the regular season. I believe the Rockets had a winning record. And the Rockets had guys on the team that would not necessarily be scared of Michael Jordan like everybody else. We all know Michael Jordan would you know, scare the living heck out of you if you're an opponent, right? He was the best player in the world. But the Rockets just had guys like Vernon Maxwell, you know, obviously Hakeem the Dream. And they weren't afraid of the Bulls, and they got the best of the Bulls. Now, in the Rockets' defense, they obviously didn't get to face the Bulls because Michael Jordan retired. But had they still faced them in the finals, there's a very good chance that the Bulls would have lost because they had nobody to contain Hakeem Olajuwon. Now you can make the same claim saying who would have stopped Michael Jordan on the Rockets, but like I just said, the Rockets had guys that weren't afraid to, you know, go ahead and play and guard Michael Jordan. So Sam was not very sure about that. He said the Rockets really, really gave the Bulls problems, and I believe it. And to me, that tells me I don't think the Bulls would have won, both of those championships in 94, 95 when Michael Jordan retired. Obviously, 95, he came back and they lost in the playoffs to the Orlando Magic. So you can basically say they obviously did not win that year. But in 94, they have a hard time believing if they could beat the Rockets. So that's what Sam Smith says. And you know what? I think it's right. You know, to win 3 championships, I mean, the toll it takes on your body, it's a lot. People don't realize that toll is a lot mentally and physically. You're tired and you're exhausted. And obviously, I think part of that is the reason Michael Jordan retired, because he was so tired and exhausted. This man had been going championship, playing USA Olympic basketball. I mean, doing everything else in between. So you combine all of that with a bad matchup with the Houston Rockets, and I don't think the Bulls would have gone 8 straight. It's very hard to think that. Now, again, I never want to bet against Michael Jordan, but that is what Sam Smith basically was alluding to. Now, time for the second question. Did Jerry Krause, in fact, break up the Chicago Bulls after the second three-peat? This is actually the crux of the entire Last Dance documentary, right? Jerry Krause is the villain in the documentary. So is it really true Jerry Krause is the reason the Bulls got broken up? Not necessarily. Here's what Sam Smith said. After the 96 season, 95-96, when the Bulls won 72 games, at that time a league record, and won the championship, Phil Jackson was contemplating moving on from the Bulls. Now, you might say, is that because of his strenuous relationship with Jerry Krause? No, it is because Phil Jackson actually had a rule that he went by where after 7 years, he believed a team tunes you out. After 7 years, your voice no longer holds the same weight. And he had joined the Bulls, I believe, in 89. It had been about 7 years at that point. And so the Bulls, so Phil Jackson basically had made up his mind that he was going to walk away from the Chicago Bulls. Now, at that time, and you saw this in the documentary, Jerry Reinsdorf had flown out to Phil Jackson's house in Montana and signed him to a 1-year deal, and Phil Jackson agreed. So he actually did this 2 times. He did this after the 96 season and after the 97 season to convince Phil Jackson to keep taking these 1-year deals. Jerry Reinsdorf had to go and convince Phil Jackson. So this had nothing initially to do with Jerry Krause. Yes, the Jerry Krause situation didn't help. When you say to the media that I don't care if my coach goes 82-0, he's out of here, obviously that's not going to help. But Phil Jackson himself wanted out. Phil Jackson himself thought, it's time for me to move on. And so it took the ownership to go ahead and convince Phil Jackson, and Jerry Reinsdorf did that. And now you might ask, why did he keep offering 1-year deals? Well, that's all Phil Jackson took, okay? And so you have that aspect of it. Now let's talk about Michael Jordan's part in all this. Michael Jordan obviously said he's not going to play for any other coach besides Phil Jackson, and that was absolutely true. So if Phil Jackson is making the decision that he's done with the Bulls that had nothing to do with Jerry Krause, obviously Michael Jordan is going to leave as well. Now, Michael Jordan, people think the Bulls pushed him out when he wanted to stay. No, that's not the case. You really think the Chicago Bulls say no to Michael Jordan? If Michael Jordan said, give me a blank check right now and I'll play in 99 and not retire, Jerry Reinsdorf's handing over the blank check. Oh, you better believe it. So what actually happened is the trickle-down effect of Phil Jackson saying, I'm moving on, and then basically ownership having to convince him, and then Michael Jordan saying, okay, Phil's here for another year. I'm going to take another 1-year deal, and then I'm going to take another 1-year deal. And those were those massive contracts. And now you might ask again, why not offer the multi-year deals? Well, you have to take into account the Bulls were an old team at that point. Scottie Pippen was old. Michael Jordan was old. Dennis Rodman was old. Ron Harper. All these guys were old. And so it was not making a lot of sense to give these multi-year deals. But basically, Michael Jordan was just following suit with Phil Jackson. Do you think if he wanted to come back, the Bulls would have turned him down? Heck no. Heck no. So Michael Jordan only left, obviously, because of Phil Jackson. But Phil Jackson did not initially leave because of Jerry Krause. It was because of his own rule that he had. So essentially, Sam Smith made the point that Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan themselves decided when the dynasty was going to end. And you know what? To their credit, I mean, if Jerry Krause doesn't help expedite that situation, I mean, potentially they lose if they don't have the same team, because at that point, Dennis Rodman, it was very difficult to keep him, locked in. Scottie Pippen was obviously pissed off and angry, wanted to be traded. Imagine Scottie Pippen the year after. You think he really would have wanted to stay? Scottie Pippen wanted out. So imagine how hard it would have been to keep the same team. So you could see the tension of all the players. You could see Phil Jackson, the head coach, not wanting to be there. So all of that contributed to the end of the dynasty. Did Jerry Krause play a part in it? Absolutely. But to Sam Smith's point, the reason the dynasty broke up after the second three-peat was their own doing in Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan. If either wanted to come back or both, the Bulls would have absolutely said yes and taken them back. Both said no. That is why the dynasty ended. Period, point blank. So like I said, folks, that is the cold hard truth here. So if Michael Jordan ever retires the second time, I have a hard time believing the Bulls win another championship. Again, potentially that year, 99, there was a lockout year. They would have faced the Spurs because a weak Knicks team came out of the East. Sure, you can make that argument. But like I said, it would have been very difficult to keep that team intact. And again, back to the point I make, after 3 championships, you're brutally exhausted mentally, physically. I made this point that Jerry Reinsdorf came on and said that had the Bulls and Michael Jordan really not gotten them to win Game 6 against Utah in 98 when he made the last shot, I mean, they were exhausted. Steve Kerr said they were exhausted. Game 7 would have been insanely difficult for them. So to the point I'm trying to make here is just be happy with the 6. Just be happy with the 6 rings, folks, because I'm telling you, it would have been very difficult to assume the Bulls would have won more championships. So I'm going to just be happy with the 6 championships, the 6-0, and I'll take it. Could we have won 1 or 2 more? You could always say that, but now we know really what the truth is. The truth is the Bulls themselves and Michael Jordan, Phil Jackson wanted to end the dynasty, and they did, and it wasn't really Jerry Krause as much as we think. It was still a little bit, but not as much as we think. So there you have it, folks. That is the absolute truth. Let me know what you guys think about that. Leave a comment down below if you agree or disagree. As always, thanks for watching.